Welcome to the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. I'm Melisa Lieberman, a fellow IC and business coach. On this podcast, I teach you to become a consistently booked independent consultant without becoming a pushy salesperson or working 24/7. If I can do it, you can too. Listen on to find out how. Robert, thank you for joining us here today on the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. I'm so happy to have you here. We met each other in a future of work forum that we're both in and met offline. And I took your AI for Executives course. I think I've referenced that on a prior episode of this podcast. And at that time, I said I would try to get you on the podcast to talk more about AI for consulting. And we are here today. So I'm so excited to have you and would love for you to start off and introduce yourself. Tell the listeners about who you are.
Well, thank you. That was so kind of you to have me on here. And I like that we met in the future of work. I'm not even sure what that actually means, but maybe that can be part of our conversation today is figuring out what is the future of work.
That's right. It's dynamic.
And continuously evolving. That's why it's in the future.
That's right.
So maybe just a little bit about me, as you were asking. I'm not a great intro for myself, but I will do my best. So my name is Robert. Last name is Reich. For whatever weird reason, I was always taught that it's pronounced Rich, even though it looks like Reich. I'm not connected to the ex-labor secretary, who I think is a brilliant man and has done just an amazing job of staying very consistent for the last 30 years of what his views are. I met him once very briefly in Aspen, but separate topic. And so a little bit about me. I'm an entrepreneur really at heart. That's what I like to do. I like to help entrepreneurs. I like to build companies. And when I'm not doing that, I like to basically give back either through mentoring or actually through consulting. And so I'm in that in-between phase where I am not currently running a company or starting a company. And so I'm in the phase of consulting and working with other companies. And so a little bit more detail, I've been an adjunct professor at the University of Colorado, teaching on entrepreneurial mindset and entrepreneurial thinking. I did that for about 7 years. Recently, I've been doing speaking on AI. I keynoted a couple of events recently, which was really kind of fun. And I would say I've been building AI solutions as kind of a product owner and like inventor for the last 15 years. And I've worked for companies like Microsoft, Canon, Wells Fargo, and now working with a bunch of young startups as well as larger companies to help them figure out their AI strategy.
We're so lucky to have you here, and also go Buffs. I am a Colorado Buffalo, so for you to be, you live in Boulder and the adjunct professor, that's fun. In fact, I would love to come take your entrepreneurial mindset class next time you teach it. That would be fun.
It was a fun class. It was challenging.
Yeah.
We did a couple of really cool things. It was for grad students only. And so it was structured in a way that a lot of fun, setting up with the curriculum. So we set it up in such a way that the people stood up on day one of the class, then presented ideas. What kind of companies did they want to create? We then worked with the Entrepreneurial Law Clinic at CU, who drafted a custom LLC document. So all the companies, everybody that pitched, then created their own LLC. Simple, but there's fear in kind of how do I become a legal entity?
Yeah.
And then the bylaws of that LLC agreement gave me some minimal amount of control while we were in the program. And then afterwards, they either dissolved the company or they kept it going. And some of those companies are still going today, which is awesome.
Robert, that's phenomenal.
But what we did that was really fun is I graded the CEOs and the CEOs graded all of the members of their teams. And so day one, they pitched, and then they all formed together into which one of those ideas they liked. Then they formed companies. They had to sell something by the end, and then they either dissolved or didn't dissolve. And then the CEOs would grade all of the other team members. And if they did it fairly, I would grade them appropriately. If they did it inappropriately, I got to kind of have that conversation as well. And so it was really fun to kind of go through that process and walk people from kind of how do I start an idea all the way through how do I sell something. It was cool.
Yeah, that sounds phenomenal. This is way off the topic of what we were planning today, which I love. Tell me, what were some of the takeaways that you noted? You said it's an entrepreneurial mindset
Yeah.
course. So what were some of the key takeaways for people that are starting businesses and on the mindset side?
I think that's a great segues back to what this topic
Mm.
is. And so what I have found over the years is that we can be taught a little bit of muscle memory and also be given discipline on what can be helpful, what choices we make today, how they will affect us tomorrow. And so we did different types of exercises that would challenge that muscle. For example, all of these people were grad students, right? They wanted to come out and get a job somewhere. And I would have a person, let's say, who had high potential to hire somebody. And it was a really high profile person this person would love to spend an hour with. And so at 10 p.m., the night before the meeting could potentially happen, I would send a note out and say, if you're interested in meeting with X, you need to do Y. And all of a sudden, everybody would like panic, right? Because it was like, let's say the meeting was at 9 a.m. So they didn't have a lot of time. It's now 10 p.m. the night before. Choice number one is, do I kill myself, right? Trying to prepare whatever this thing is for this meeting in the morning. Or do I not kill myself and just ignore it, right? That's choice number one in that is, do I actually pay attention to this shiny new object that just showed up for me? And I would do exercises like that over and over again throughout the semester that would challenge their time assumptions towards making a business decision. Those that did it got the reward. Those that didn't also got the reward. Some of the other things that we did is we rewarded for failure. So you don't get, like, if you don't succeed at what you're doing in entrepreneurship, the business might fail, but you still might learn. And if you're in a school, right, in an academic environment, how do you encourage people to take risk? How do you encourage people to participate? You say it, this isn't about getting, selling the most product in the end. It's about what lessons are you learning in the process?
Yeah.
And so the muscle memory piece, right, and the entrepreneurial thinking is, when should I take advantage of that shiny new object that just emerged? How important, how critical is it? And I'm sure the listeners here and yourself, right, you go through that. What is that exciting new thing? Today, we're going to talk about AI, right?
Yeah.
It's an exciting new thing. Is it something you should be paying attention to today, in 1 month, in 6 months, right? How much of your energy should you give it at this moment in order to allow you to be a better consultant, in order to allow you to solve your customers' needs or your own pain points or use cases? Those are hard questions.
Yeah. They are hard questions. And I think as consultants, we love variety sometimes. And so I think it's very common to get into a spot where you're constantly chasing the new thing. And to your point, there's an opportunity cost to that.
Totally.
Yeah.
And so again, how much of it do I need to learn, right? Is it just a little bit that gets me all the way? Or do I need to dive in deep and spend the next month in that and not be prospecting or not be doing some other project, right?
Yeah.
That was another thing that I tried to learn about the students is, where were they comfortable, right? What was your default that you went back to when you became stressful?
Mm.
So let's say you're a writer and you're really good at writing. Well, when you become stressful in this new situation of whatever the project is, you probably defaulted to writing. And I would always push on that is that really where you should be? Like, that's your comfort zone? I get it. But if you're defaulting to your comfort zone, are you actually solving the problem at hand? Or are you going to what you're familiar with and ignoring the problems that are there that you actually have to solve in order to move this client forward? And so we touched on a lot of these when the entrepreneurial thinking, entrepreneurial behavior type things to give people that awareness.
Yeah. It's so critical, just getting into that defaults and knowing what the default is, like you're saying, and using that as a great flag to say, oh, I see what I'm doing right now. Am I doing the right thing for whatever it is I'm trying to achieve? Or am I just, like you said, going back to the comfort zone and using that as a really good flag to say, redirect? Yeah.
Totally. What's your comfort zone?
Oh, my comfort zone is setting up some new technology.
Interesting,
Just
right?
always configuring a new system, basically. Yeah. What's yours, Robert?
I love design.
Ah,
Really like design. So if I find myself like in a program like Figma for more than like 10 minutes, I'm like, wait, what am I doing? Am I like in a place where I should be? What's my priority list of what problem I actually need to solve right now?
Right.
And it's so amazing. It's over and over again. And you'll catch yourself not 15 minutes in, but 2 hours
Right.
in. And the hard part is it's actually work that has to get done, right? But is it prioritized as to when you need to do it, right? That's the tricky part in that. And being a solo entrepreneur or a solo consultant, right? You always have that problem of where should I be spending my time in order to get the most out of this? And working from home, which is awesome, right? But it's also really hard because you don't have a task being dropped on top of you. You actually have to figure out those tasks.
That's right.
For me, if you find me in design too long, I'm going, no, stop.
Like, I do not need to configure a new task management system. Let's redirect. Amazing. So I thought it would be fun, Robert, and I warned you about this already, but to tell the listeners to really group our conversation today. That was like a bonus part, which is probably incredible. I love talking about mindset. We could be here all day on that topic alone. But the three buckets I thought might be valuable to hear from you and your experience are, number one, how are you seeing it in enterprise clients? So as a consultant, what are you seeing? And I've got a few questions for you around that. And then we'll talk about AI solutions for consultants to run their own businesses. And then we'll wrap up with some of your expertise in, like you said, in between companies that you're running when you're working as a consultant, how you're doing that and being successful. So let's start off with on the enterprise client side. What trends are you seeing when it comes to enterprise client use of AI? Maybe you can tell us a little bit about the types of clients you're working with and what you're seeing.
Yeah. So I would say for everybody, not just enterprise clients, right?
Yeah.
It's time to be curious, right? It's time to say, what is this shiny new object? And is it right for me? Is it right for my clients? Like, it's a really important time to do that. And I say that because the world of artificial intelligence and really machine learning, which is where a lot of this has been for the last 10 years, has become a background type of feature for a lot of companies. And when OpenAI released ChatGPT November of last year, so we're just 1 year into this technology, right? And about 3 years into the transformer technology that kind of underpinned a lot of what they based their technology on. The world kind of changed. And I applaud OpenAI for what it did, right? The fact that they made it public rather than keeping it hidden behind closed doors until, they thought it was perfect. And so that caught almost everybody by surprise. And then all of a sudden, everybody started to scramble to figure out what was what. So when we look at large enterprises, a lot of them are still in that planning and really that R&D phase.
Yeah.
They're leveraging the APIs that are out there from OpenAI, right? Their internal teams are playing with tools like ChatGPT. There's other companies out there like Anthropic that has a product called Claude. Google has a product called Bard. Microsoft is built on top of OpenAI and it uses Bing and what they call copilots, right? And so there's just a lot of experimentation that's going on in the general enterprise environment. You have a few companies that have really jumped ahead. Most of those are tech. I would say Adobe and Microsoft, right, besides OpenAI, are probably the two companies that are jumping in the fastest. And so if you take Adobe as an example, they started out with Firefly as kind of this alpha view into what you can do with images. And so if you're to create an image, you can go to Firefly. It's a product by Adobe. And what they realized was their community had potentially had an issue when creating images if the images were owned by other people or were created from images that were owned from other folks. And so they said, we're going to only use images that are open source and available. And they started to craft that. But at the same time, they started to look at use cases within their own products like Photoshop and Illustrator, right? And probably Premiere for videos on things that they could do with this technology. And they've already rolled those tools out in their commercial products. So if you're using Photoshop, for example, you could go into generative fill and have it automatically use AI to create portions of your image. And so it's been insane to see a technology go from introduction a year ago to being commercially available in a product like Photoshop that supports, the entire graphic design segment, as well as many other parts of the industry. Same goes for Adobe Illustrator. I played with it the other day and I was looking at an illustration I had done, and it wasn't a very good one. And then I basically took a little square over a section of it and I said, put a golf ball there. And it was able to draw a golf ball, not as pixels, but as lines, the way Illustrator would do it, that I could then go move the points around and readjust. If I would have drawn that golf ball, I'm not a golfer, but if I would have drawn that golf ball, it would have taken me like hours. But instead, I was able to do it in a second by simply saying, draw a golf ball. And it only did it in the area within the image that I was interacting with. It didn't have to do the whole thing. So they have come along so quickly and figured out how to leverage this technology to enhance the current user base that they have. Microsoft is another great example of that with Copilots. Their release inside of GitHub has been, at least the numbers they're talking about, have been transformative. Like we're talking about a 40% in some cases increase in productivity for a software engineer.
Yeah.
I presented this at a show, or actually somebody else presented it at one of the places where I was talking. And the CEO was like, wow, we can get 40% more things done. Right. And the engineer was like, we got all panicky. Right. But he was trying to highlight
do not like that. Yeah.
Better than the alternative, right?
That's
that means we can get rid of 40% of the people. No, don't like that either.
That's right.
So the majority of companies are trying to figure this out. And those that are already kind of on board have started to make some progress. I think the important things that we're seeing are kind of two buckets. One is companies are looking at it, how can I get a 10x improvement from each employee so in turn we can do more things? The other group is looking at it going, if I'm getting a 10x improvement from our people, what does that mean from our staffing perspective? Right? And both of those, I think, should be interesting to a consultant. Because in both cases, they can really come in, right, and help out. And in the case of where people are going to be transitioned to doing other things, right, the consultant might actually be able to step in during this process and actually say, hey, I can solve that problem for you. You may have just transitioned these people out, but you still actually have this problem as the technology is getting built up.
Yeah.
And so to me, that's really the big thing is most people are in the planning and R&D phases and trying to figure it out. I think within the next 18 to 24 months, we'll really start to see the majority of enterprises start to see the benefits to what they're doing and how they're doing it. Because if you're just in the planning stages, people are just getting the bits and bytes kind of moving.
Yeah. Okay. Robert, I'm curious, as you're consulting with your clients, are you doing more project-based work or AI strategy or both? Tell us a little bit about what those projects are looking like for your organization.
Yeah, most things are kind of acting as a combination.
Okay.
And so when I say that, meaning I'm usually starting with something similar to the course that you had taken, where let's educate the executive team. And then once we've educated the executive team to use cases and things that they can be doing or thinking about, usually there's some form of prototyping or follow-on work that we're doing. And it's a combination of strategic as well as tactical. It's such a fundamental difference as to how you can think about solving a problem. So let me give an example. When you write code and you're going to use an API to interface between a back end and a front end, it's incredibly precise. The front end knows what the back end's going to give, and the back end, right, has to deliver it exactly how the front end wants it or needs it. When you start talking about a language model that's going to give back something, but you don't know what it's going to give back, it's a very different way to think about how you write software.
Yeah.
And so there's an education that has to happen not only at the strategic level of a business, where might this be useful, but also at the implementation level, right? Because you're writing more of a wrapper around this thing that's going to give input, right? That some human is then going to interact with. That's why you're seeing chatbots as one of the really like logical ways that this is being rolled out at first, because really it's just downloading information on the screen and then you're interacting with that information in a conversation standpoint. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. And what you're saying too leads me to thinking about, at first you were talking about technology related, embedding in products and developer engineering kind of projects, but also to your point, chatbots, looking at all of the different functions in the organization and figuring out how they might leverage either existing AI driven products or building in some ways or customizing their own to accomplish a variety of different use cases across the organization.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that are interesting there too. One, the majority of the machine learning types of tasks that enterprises have been doing over the course of the last 10 years, if anybody in your audience has watched Silicon Valley on HBO, I guess now Max, right? Like there was this whole piece about hot dog or no hot dog, right? And that's what the software was really good at. And it was trained on, tens of thousands to millions of pictures of hot dogs. But if you asked it to tell you if it was a goldfish or not, it would say not a hot dog, right? Like it didn't know anything else. And a lot of the software that has been machine learning or AI focused over this last decade have really been these very point specific type of applications that do one thing really well, right? And what we're seeing with this transition is we now have a generalized, what they're calling a foundational model that can do multiple things. It's a very different way of thinking about how to interact with the software. And if you've played with the latest tools from OpenAI, their phone implementation is really fascinating. We had an event in Boulder last week, and there was probably a 10-year-old boy who was sitting in front of me, and he and I were talking. And I took out the OpenAI iPhone app, and I said, you can talk to it. And he's like, what do you mean I can talk to it? I'm like, you can talk to it, ask it any question. He's like, really? And I'm like, yeah. And so the first thing that we've just did, if you kind of peel back, we've enabled voice as a way to communicate to our computer. And then the computer took that voice, whatever the boy had said, it understood his intent, and it gave him back an answer. His question was, or what he wanted to see was, could you draw a picture of LeBron James, the basketball star, right, playing against a dog? And the software said, LeBron James is a famous person. I can't use his likeness because it might break copyright law. But what I can do is create a dog playing basketball in what looks like a professional uniform in a professional stadium. Would you like that instead? And I watched the little boy's mind. It just exploded in front of me. He's like, wait a minute. It understood who the player was. It understood copyright as a potential problem. And it offered an alternative suggestion that he got to engage in a conversation with a machine to make a decision with. And he said yes. And it output a German Shepherd doing this big slam dunk with this cool pair of sneakers.
That's amazing.
Like you watched his whole head explode in a positive way of like,
Yeah.
wow, I can't believe this. So what we're seeing is the eyes, right? The ears now being applied to computers. So very different than this keyboard entry that we have.
Yeah.
Or this very clumsy Siri integration, right? Or Alexa integration that's one stop. You kind of ask it something. It doesn't really have a follow on, right? And it's in this voice that's kind of human, but not human. All of a sudden, we're getting an interface to the computer that's so different to where it's actually becoming a thing that you can interact with, right? That can interact back with you. Very sci-fi in that context,
Yeah.
right? We're in Star Trek and I'm tapping my chest and I'm going, right, computer, do this for me. And it's off doing its tasks.
Yeah. So very different than what we've been used to for the last 30 years or however long it's been. Yeah. Amazing.
And so if you use that, at least for me, where I keep going is it's time to be curious. If I can talk to my computer, and I don't just mean search for something, right? I'm not saying, tell me the weather or can you tell me directions, right? This little boy like wanted something very specific. And not only did it give him words, it actually drew a picture for him, right? So when you're putting on your brain and you're kind of going, how can I leverage this technology? It's so fundamentally different than the way we have been thinking about it that you have to kind of give yourself a little bit of time and space to say, where is this going to be useful? How can this change? And, we're immediately jumping to customer service and answering questions and things that are very obvious.
Yeah.
But you can quickly see how this combination, or what they call multimodal capabilities, right, is going to enable us to do really powerful things in the future.
It's kind of an interesting parallel to what we were talking about at the very beginning, which is we have a point in time here where we have to rethink what our normal is. So it's like a question is asked of us from a client, or a client asks for some kind of a solution from us. Do we just go to what we're used to doing and what's comfortable and just take our regular approach to delivering that to the client? Or we just take a pause for a moment and to your point, get curious about what other solutions might be out there, or what kind of different way could I even imagine that this problem could be solved?
Yep.
Rather than just going into the default.
100%, right? I mean, you could almost think about it that we all have our templates that we pull from.
Yeah.
Which are both great because I have my template and my way of thinking about it, but it also creates a bias as to how we solve that problem. And so imagine if all of a sudden you could ask that same type of question to something that had all the information in the world, and it could give you this new perspective, or maybe the same perspective, right? And it could do it in a few seconds.
Yeah.
Like all of a sudden, just your process changes. Or where it becomes even more challenging, I would imagine, as a consultant, because we always want, like, I do A, B, and C, right? And I'm hoping that my new client wants A, B, or C, but sometimes they want C+1.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, well, how do I solve the +1 part of this problem? And what do I do today? I go run a search and I start digging through Google and I start finding documents, or I call coworkers and I ask those questions, right? That's expensive. That's time consuming. Well, what if I could just type +1 into a little chat interface and it gives me 10 ideas? And then I go, oh, I've kind of done 2 of those ideas before. And maybe go back to that same system. How can I correlate what I just saw with C? And I put in whatever C is, and it says, these 2 are related in the following way. And all of a sudden, I've jump-started this new capability, and I found my connection to where it was before, right? And so it's this ability to leverage knowledge to make us more efficient at what we do, and ideally be able to offer more services to clients. There's a professor out of Wharton, who I think is doing a lot of interesting research into this. I think his name is Ethan Mullick.
Mm.
And he teaches an entrepreneurial class, and I may be wrong in this, but I'm pretty sure this is what I read. During his class, people come into it and they could be engineers, they could be on the marketing side, they could be on the finance side. And he asks them, when they're creating a business, to use AI to do one of the things that they're not good at. So if you're an engineer, have AI take care of the marketing part, but you have to do it. You have to communicate with it.
Right.
Or if you're in marketing, have AI do the website for you, or actually do the technology part for you. So expanding what your capabilities are and changing the way you think about how you solve problems. It's not just your ABC that's in your template. You now have the capability to say, I can tackle any problem, right? And actually engage to get an answer to how you would do it very efficiently, rather than all of the research that it would take to become a software engineer to go build that first prototype. I'm not saying you're going to deliver it as a solution, but maybe it gets you out of the gate and gets that new client.
Yeah.
Right? The ability to quickly expand beyond where your comfort zone is.
Yeah. And it seems as though, you tell me, Robert, but one of the skill sets that most of us should be working on right now is learning how to communicate with these tools in a way that gives us those types of answers. The better we can talk to the tool, the more expansiveness we'll have, essentially.
Yeah, we went through this in the class that you had taken, right? It's like,
yeah,
we've learned, many of us, not all of us, but if you've ever noticed that some people are really good at searching Google and get right to the answer almost instantly, right?
yeah,
And others like fumble around. searching Google is a form of prompting. And the better you are at interacting with it, the faster you can get to your answers. The first thing that I would say to the listeners here is don't think of generative AI as a search engine. Think of it as an assistant. Talk to it as if it was an assistant that you were working with, instead of trying to find the 3 perfect words that would be the search that's going to return something. It's okay to be more verbose. It's okay to say please and thank you and actually engage and interact with it. And all of a sudden, you'll find that the first answer might be generic, just like an assistant might go out and bring back some really simple, basic things. And then you refine and you say, that's great, but I need it to actually give me more context about whatever this is. And all of a sudden, it starts to be more specific. Like you can engage through that conversation. And so that's step 1. Before you even try to get fancy and figure out prompting and multi-shot and chain of, talk to it like it's an assistant. And again, it's okay to say please. It's okay to say thank you. And just be curious and learn. The second thing that I would say, and I'm not a big fan of asking people to spend money, but spending the $20 through OpenAI and using the latest version is exponentially better. Every person that I've had this conversation with and gone through training with that has done that has gone from, I can see where this would be beneficial, to, okay, I get it. Like it's literally a binary switch of, I get it now, why this is so powerful. I had this conversation yesterday with a really good friend of mine who's a consultant, specializes in business strategy. And I watch him painfully writing. He's the writer. He sits down and it takes him weeks to craft those words. And I'm so excited to sit down this weekend and show him that literally in about 10 seconds, I can get his first pass. And it'll be a B, right? A C+ to a B grade that he would be like, wow, that would have taken me a week to get there. And so just imagine if you're that type of person, right? If I can cut a week's effort out of that, what does that do in the way of giving you productivity to do something else or to spend more time refining?
That's right. Yeah.
Right? The AI is not going to be perfect. It's going to introduce problems, and that's okay. But the more you're a domain expert, you'll quickly identify those problems and be able to leverage where its value is. And the blank canvas is one of those.
Yes, that's phenomenal. Tell me Robert, when you think about, so if we put ourselves in the consultant's shoes for a moment, obviously you're a consultant also, but if you put yourself in a consultant's shoes who doesn't have the experience that you have and is thinking about how they might leverage AI in their service offerings. We've touched on this in a lot of different ways, but I'm curious, what would you recommend to them, especially if they're not a technical type consultant?
Yeah, 100%. A lot of what's out there today are interfaces on top of the more popular foundational models. Some of those tools are trying to get fancier and fancier and moving away and starting to do more specific things. But I would say as a starting point, if you use ChatGPT from OpenAI, spend the $20. And if it doesn't work for you, it's month to month, so you can cancel at any point. So worst case is you spend $20. And then the second one would be for images. I'm a big fan of, even though you're going to get image generation as part of that $20 from OpenAI, right, in ChatGPT now, I actually am a bigger fan of Midjourney for creating images. Yeah. So if you have to create a new PowerPoint, if you were to start in OpenAI and say, I need to create a 10-page PowerPoint on this topic, it would literally create without any more knowledge, just giving it a general concept and say, go. And then you could even go so far as to say, give me a couple ideas for graphics that I could put on this page. And then you go over to Midjourney. Again, sadly, you've got to pay for Midjourney. It's $10 a month, which should be plenty. And put in the prompt in Midjourney, and it'll create an image for you. That combination alone, I think, gets you so far. And you're not locking yourself into a potential proprietary system that might not make it or that might not evolve, because these services are evolving so quickly. And I think those base products meet a lot of the needs. OpenAI just released something that are called GPTs. And there was a lot of companies that were really trying to create that style of products. I'm not sure what they're going to do. And I think the same thing is going to keep happening as OpenAI continues to evolve its product space. You'll get other products that will pop out. But if I'm a consultant and I want to put my time and energy someplace at the moment, I would say you're not going to go wrong by using those two tools, and you're going to learn everything you need. And they solve the most generic problems that you're going to have.
Yeah, learning how to communicate with the core function, ChatGPT, and what was the other one? Midjourney, is that right? Midjourney.
Yeah.
And then you just paste it into PowerPoint or whatever once it gives you what you need to do and refine it from there.
Lots of copy and paste. Now, again, there's other tools you can use, like Beautiful AI, right?
Yeah.
It's a tool that's out there that just does presentations. It will continue to get better. But like, I found its interface actually to be quite good when I played with it. But any of the AI stuff, I found myself going back to OpenAI and going back and using those tools to figure it out, and then coming back. And I was like, well, I already have Google Suite. I already have the PowerPoint suite. Do I need another tool that makes it a little bit prettier?
Yeah.
And if you do, great. But if you don't, stay in tools that you're familiar with. And again, I'm an entrepreneur, so I want to support all these younger companies. But sadly, at the moment, it's unclear they're gonna make it.
Yeah.
Want them to, but it's unclear. And I would say for your community, find a way to share if people find other tools that are being helpful, right? A lot of them out there today.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so good. Robert, tell me, let's switch gears again. And you've been a consultant for a while. And I'm just curious, tell us what your biggest lesson has been as a consulting business owner.
The ups and downs are really hard.
Mm.
You know, like I worked on a project for 3 years that was great. So much effort, so much energy, great client. And then all of a sudden it ended. And it's like, all right, did I prepare properly for when it's going to end? Did it end in a time where I was set up in a place to succeed in what came next?
Yeah.
And a lot of the projects that I work on, it's not me alone. It ends up being a team of anywhere from, 2 to 100 people. And so it's also about the preparation for them and how do you, build their process into, we've got another project coming up or we don't have another project. So that's always the hardest part I find is keeping the clients running in a consistent flow that you get the benefit of having your own business, but you also get the consistency of working for a larger company.
Mm-hmm. Before we started the call, you were talking about most of your clients come from word of mouth. Tell us a little bit about how have you built up that reputation so that you're really sought after for what you do?
I'll give you a secret, and it's not a secret because I think you're already doing this in different ways. By doing a podcast or by running an event or doing something, you immediately put yourself as an expert in the front of the room. Whether or not you are an expert in that topic is an open conversation, right?
Yeah.
But by putting yourself there, people then look to you and say, oh, that person knows what they're talking about. And there's different ways you can do that. You can write blog posts. You can host a podcast. You can run an event. You can do online seminars. You can write a book, right? All of these different are tools that are prospecting tools in a way, but they're also prospecting tools that allow you to be the expert rather than you're a cold calling person trying to get work.
Yeah.
And I'm an introvert. And most people that meet me don't think that. They think I'm actually an extrovert, but I'm not. I'm like the guy, I would much rather be at the barbecue cooking than the person walking around meeting folks. I'm terrible in that scenario. And so by putting yourself in front and taking on that role, you can immediately become the expert that people can relate to. It's way more about your personality and your style. You can even interview somebody else that is the actual expert, and you get that leverage of that social capital. And I would say I've been doing that for about 20 years. Like that's my secret little hack is basically put yourself in the front of the room as the expert and then let everybody build you up with that and drive it home. You have to be able to fulfill it, right?
That's right. Yep.
If you're not a developer and you host a developer conference and then somebody hires you to develop, you got to figure that out.
Yeah.
That's more than a C+1. That's like you're now at a Z and you're trying to go, okay, what do I do? But as long as you stay within the area where you're comfortable, you can quickly jump to the front of the line. And that's the hard part I find is the prospecting and the sales, because I'm sure most people listening are super capable in their domain expertise.
Absolutely.
But how do you get that visibility is always the tricky part.
Yeah.
The not so secret.
Thank you for the not so secret. And it so reinforces. I think it's so important. I so appreciate you sharing that you're an introvert, because I hear this so often, and consultants think that it's something that prevents them from being able to do what you've just described. And it doesn't need to prevent them from being able to stand up front of that room.
Don't get me wrong. And for those my age will come through here, right? But Peter Brady, right, in the Brady Bunch threw a party and he thought nobody was going to show up, right? That's one of the famous episodes. Every time I do one of these things, I have that. My nerves are going in my stomach, my saliva is in my mouth, and I'm like, who's going to show up? Is this going to work? So that imposter syndrome always shows up, but you learn how to get comfortable. And that's why I use the term role, right? It's not necessarily you that's doing it.
Yes.
At the barbecue, I'm now the chef. I'm getting to cook the food, and everybody wants, to smell that whatever it is that's cooking. It smells amazing, right?
Yes.
It doesn't matter if it's a Costco hamburger in the end, because it smells good and people are going to come up and talk to you. And if you can do it properly, you can deliver this great thing, and then all of a sudden they're excited by it.
Yeah, that's such a powerful tool. I don't know if you've read that book, The Alter Ego by Todd Herman, but it's that concept, right? Where you're bringing on, if you think of Superman and Clark Kent, you're bringing on this other role that you're playing for the purpose of speaking, for example, or being interviewed, for example, or, putting yourself out in that visible way in order to get yourself to the place where you'll actually take the action. And then you can go rest after that, right? Recover.
I'm glad there's some science behind my secret, not secret little hack. I'm sure there's lots of folks that research that.
That's phenomenal. It's been so we could go on for days here, Robert, but we're coming here toward the end. Tell us a little bit about how to find you, and are there any resources you have that you would like to share with other consultants? Tell everyone where to find you.
So the easiest place is website. It's pretty minimal at this moment, but it's my name. So it's Robert, last name Reich.co. I was competing with another more famous Robert Reich to actually get the .com. So I have a .co version of it, but you can pretty much reach me there. My email is robert@robertrich.co as well. So really easy to get in contact with. I'd love to work with folks. So to me, that's really exciting, and figuring out ways to find other folks that are passionate or need this additional skill set in what they offer, I think would be a really fun way to do it. I'm not doing as many kind of public sessions, which is the one that you went through. Yeah. I'm doing a lot more just private corporate ones. I'm finding that 2 1-hour sessions with a homework assignment in the middle is a great way to get people from, I don't know what this is, to being curious, right? You're not going to solve all the problems in that timetable. There's way too much there. But how do you get people familiar in their industry? And I've done it for art, for healthcare, for finance, for ed tech, right? For just a range of different business disciplines, and then use cases within those. And so the session that I usually do is day 1 is all about the overview. Just give me the basics, right? How is this being used today? The homework is a very practical set of things that you're going to do to interact, to get comfortable and start to become familiar. And then the part 2 is custom use cases, right? Where are the use cases within my business that people are either done something or starting to do something or considering to do something? And I find it really gets people over the hump really quickly. So it's basically, 3 hours worth of work and you're done. Or I should say you're getting started.
Yeah.
Done's too strong of a word. You're curious. You're ready to go.
You're curious.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the theme, right? Let's just get into curiosity.
Exactly.
The thing I want to point out before we wrap up too is what you just described is what I love to call a lead-in offer. You come into your clients, you provide this 3-day, I'll call it a workshop if that's correct, or training.
Sure.
And then they get so much exposure to what it is you do and how you do it and your level of expertise. And then that leads to follow-on work, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, where you're taking on projects within their organization.
Yep. I would go one step further and to say, like, maybe you and I do the same thing. Like if we can bring a couple of consultants together and we want to put together a session for us, I'd be open to that too. So
phenomenal.
Yeah, let's figure it out, ways we can work together. I find it's the most important way to kind of evolve is let's build off of each other's networks and let's help each other.
That sounds so good. So for the listeners, if you want to email me, melisa@melissalieberman.com, if you're interested in pulling together for Robert to give us a workshop of some sort, send that over and then we'll figure out from there what makes the most sense. Or if you have other ideas too. Whatever your ideas are based on the inspiration from this episode, email me and we'll figure it out with Robert too.
Awesome.
So fun. Great, Robert. Well, thank you again for being so generous with your time and your expertise today. I know the listeners will get so much out of this, and thank you for being here.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for joining me this week on the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. If you liked today's episode, I have 3 quick next steps for you. First, click subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to make sure you don't miss future episodes. Next, leave me a review in your podcast app so other independent consultants can find and benefit too. And finally, to put the ideas from today's episode into action, head over to melissalieberman.com for the show notes and more resources to help you grow your consulting practice from your first few projects into a full-fledged business. See you next week.